AI, and it's a really, really powerful tool. So it's not just employees, but it's fans, it's followers, it's influence. And when you see people sort of rail against, oh, billionaires shouldn't exist, those are people that don't see the world through the lens of leverage. So anytime you can turn something into a levered, repeatable activity by someone or something else, you've accumulated leverage by doing that. There's $10 million locked in your laptop, and if you type the right string of keys, you will unlock $10 million. I'm very grateful that was on my dad's shelf.
Can you talk in detail on how you view leverage today as AI has arrived as a force multiplier?
Yeah, I'll start with just like maybe a leverage primer. So this is a somewhat confused term because some people use it to mean just debt. Like Wall Street slang, leverage is debt, and in probably political slang, leverage is like to have something over someone, to have like control over them. And this is neither of those. Like when I say leverage, I mean the definition that Naval talks about, which is really an extension of like the simple machine, a lever, right? Which, like the other simple machines, is a force multiplier. It means that you can't pick up that 800-pound rock, but if you have a 20-foot pole and a pivot point, you can use that branch or pole to like move this rock that you otherwise couldn't move. So that's a very simple like way to visualize this thing. But in this like digital realm, there's a lot of different forms of leverage, and they are all just different ways to multiply your effort, to change your input to output ratio. And so what I said in that tweet is like, there's sort of a levered class and an unlevered class. If you want to think about it, there's people that see the world this way and there's people that don't. And when you see people sort of rail against, oh, billionaires shouldn't exist, or nobody works hard enough to earn $1 million a year when somebody else is earning, 50,000 a year. Like those are people that don't see the world through the lens of leverage. They don't understand that there are people with like wildly different judgment and wildly different levels of leverage, so that if you're making decisions that affect $1 billion portfolio, and you're doing it well, you should get paid way more than somebody who's making the same decisions at a $10 million portfolio, because the effort to output ratio is just so much different, even for the same sort of levels of effort, same hours worked. This is like a big topic, but the sort of Naval was like the entry point to me for this. And there's a chapter in the book about leverage, and it's part of his famous tweet storm about how to get rich without getting lucky. Is like you have to find a position of leverage, you have to accumulate leverage, you have to think in terms of high leverage opportunities and continuously compound that. And there's a bunch of different ways to do it. There's a bunch of different means to it. We can talk about the framework, but he sort of, in brief introductory remarks that are in that book that I think resonated with a lot of people, showed me that concept. And then I tried to spend a lot of time unpacking it and understanding it myself and trying to apply it in my own life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you kind of have these like four forms of leverage, like tools, people, capital, and kind of like digital products. So I'm curious, how are you thinking about AI? It's not a new form. Is it more like a gradient that kind of covers the whole thing and kind of multiplies them all, or what's your kind of way to conceptualize that?
I think in its current form, it's a tool, and it's a really, really powerful tool. So the framework: tools, products, people, capital. A tool is anything like from an axe to a chainsaw to a tractor to a computer to to something like AI. Some of the tools are sort of abstract software tools. Some are hard physical tools. But a product distinct from that is something that you sort of infuse your knowledge into and create an instance of something that only you know, that can then replicate itself many, many times. So a very, very simple example of that is like writing out a standard operating procedure, right? A lot of the entrepreneurs you talk to are like, always work on your SOPs. Like anytime you do something, write out your thought process, write out your decision-making framework, write out the steps very carefully, and then delegate it to someone. And maybe that's a person, maybe that's a AI tool in the future or today, but externalize those things that you're currently internalizing so that you're always working on something new, something novel, building leverage. So anytime you can turn something that is a repetitious activity for you into a levered, repeatable activity by someone or something else, you've accumulated leverage by doing that. And doing that faster and better with bigger and bigger projects that are higher and higher value sort of accumulates this compounding leverage.
And do you have a form of leverage that you're naturally drawn to?
I like capital and I like products probably most. I find everybody that I talk to, and I've talked to a lot of people about this, like They all have one that they're drawn to. They have one that they know they're bad at, and they have one that that is totally invisible to them, that they don't even like think of as leverage actually. I like working with people generally and have like, but that is a very difficult, it's just high entropy, like compared to capital or products that are a little more like under the control of one person, especially at a small scale, right? So I think there's no right or wrong way to do this. Like I just want to you give the framework so that people can make their own decisions. Some people I see bottlenecked by something that they're bad at, and those people usually need a business partner to unlock it. If you're a great programmer but a terrible manager, and you want to scale a business big, you need to find somebody who's great at recruiting and managing and sort of setting a vision and marshaling people. If you just don't understand capital and can't do math or can't raise it or can't reinvest it, like you're gonna kind of always be this like solopreneur. Like maybe you're going to build a service business. Like you'll plateau somewhere if you don't sort of look at that full range. But there's also people that like, Buffett famously like compounded capital leverage for a very, very, very long time. And he knew like, I don't think anyone would call him a great manager. He's a great like persona. He's a great character, but like he found a way to make people leverage work for him with like a small number of deep relationships with people like Munger, and then just letting his CEOs go. And like he figured out how to make that work for him. So, using outliers as examples here, just for extreme cases, but even at an individual life basis or a small business basis, you have that same set of abilities, you have that same set of playbooks. You're probably bottlenecked on one of them, and running that exercise to like look at the forms that you have available and triage where you're strong, where you're weak, and who might help is useful.
Yeah, so Buffett, for example, is obviously a great capital allocator and leveraged capital to his advantage. But I think he did use people as a leverage, but not necessarily in the fact that he was just a great manager or leader. Mm-hmm. But I think he just earned a ton of goodwill and reputation with the types of deals that he did, that it kind of made him the only person for certain acquisitions and bailouts. And then he even just, his level of kind of ethics and how he communicated to the community ended up becoming kind of like a network effect for him, kind of like the annual meeting in Omaha and just the kind of cult around him. And I don't think he necessarily did that on purpose, but I think it has been a lever for him as well.
I think he absolutely did it on purpose. And it brings up a great point, which is actually some of the most like people, when we talk about this, people often hear people leverage and think employees, right? Like that's the first place everybody goes, like, oh, I need a big team. Some of the most levered people on earth do not have very many direct employees, but they have like what Buffett had, or, again, extreme examples, but like imagine Taylor Swift, Beyonce, The Rock, Ryan Reynolds. Like they don't have big teams, but they have big influence. They have a lot of people who pay attention to them, who respect them, who follow them. And that has a huge form of leverage in itself. So it's not just employees, but it's fans, it's followers, it's influence. And Buffett, to your point, like did an incredible job of building a really patient, high trust investor base. So a huge advantage as a capital allocator is like, how much faith do your investors have in you? Like, do they pull their money out when there's a downturn and you lose maneuverability, or do they stay and you gain advantage when everybody else is losing it? Those are huge breaking points for the long-term career of a capital allocator. And so a lot of people that you've seen in the investment game for decades really emphasize alignment with LPs and being really, really, or public company investors, or whatever it is. And I think that was a big part of Buffett's genius, actually, taking that Dale Carnegie course, recognizing the importance of his image, actually. Like he knew from an early age he would end up one of the richest people on earth, I think. And he very deliberately crafted his image to turn away envy and reduce the number of attacks that came in a way that like Jeff Bezos does not do, right? Like Buffett, quote unquote, lives in Omaha, but also has houses other places. He, eats the same thing, drives the same thing, but also has a private jet. But he called the jet the indefensible. But he still hosts his meetings in Omaha, and he still like throws his newspaper, and he still has this like relatively humble life, even though he's one of the richest people on earth, or at least kind of creates that story. And so I think it was a very wise, deliberate thing on his part to like understand that.
Yeah, and I think what's actually interesting too is if you think about the digital product side of things, like the ability to build media, he started doing a lot of traditional media interviews, in the 70s, in the 80s. And then as those started to get online, they started to kind of go viral within the value investing community. And you started seeing those shareholder meetings on things like YouTube, and they only kind of amplified his leverage and his reach. So more people learned about him, got interested in him, and then started digging into him in Berkshire.
Yeah, he is a master publicist, and I think that aspect of his career is actually really underexplored.
Yeah, I think so too, because he comes across so like humble, and I don't really care about this. It's not really a big deal. But when you realize how smart and calculated he is, and you see some of the decisions he's made, it would be unlikely that he hasn't thought about it strategically.
Yes, yeah, and to be clear, like this is not to take anything away from him. These are all fall in the
Number one
category of
fan here.
compliments.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan. I have a statue of him in my office. Like I'm not taking anything away. I just think it's his accomplishments are worthy of deep analysis, and I think that's an important piece of it.
For sure. So just back into leverage kind of in general, how important are these two concepts right now? Permission versus permissionless? And how important is judgment becoming as levers become even more of a force multiplier?
Yeah, different questions, both extremely important. I mean, permission is Jack Butcher is I think the coining, or maybe the best example of permissionless leverage. Like when Naval started talking about it, Jack started living it, and he built his huge following by he has I think a course or at least an idea called Permissionless Apprentice. And so rather than
I read that book.
trying to go get a job with somebody and like being rejected if you don't get hired, just start working for them for free. Like that's basically what Jack did. He took quotes, he took tweets, and he designed visual graphics of these tweets and shared them. And of course, someone feels seen, someone feels appreciated, liked his work, and so they reshare it. And it was this incredible kind of catalyst to his following that created his business, that created his, what is now an incredible career as an artist, digital artist. But this applies all over the place, right? I have another tweet that's a little quippy, but I tell friends of mine all the time, like, oh, did your job go away? Like, or you couldn't find a job, you got fired. Congratulations, you're an entrepreneur now. Like, go find somebody with a problem. Go find the company that you just left, and like the problems of that company. Like, offer to solve it for a price. There's opportunities all around you that people are not necessarily conditioned to see because they're trained through the whole school system essentially to like ask for permission, believe in that they need to be given an opportunity that's very specifically well defined, and you just have to do a little work to go like mine an opportunity for yourself and assume no one's going to give you permission and show up with some golden opportunity. You've got to like develop the skill of seeing those opportunities and kind of going after them. I mean, I get people all the time that reach out and say like, how can I help? And I'm like, I don't know. But if you come up with an idea for how to help and you pitch it, or you give me a demo of your work that is, solves a problem that like either I knew I had and didn't know the solution existed, or I know that I have this problem and you saw it and I didn't, like that's even better. So I think there's opportunities all around, and you just have to like develop the skill of cultivating them. The forms of leverage are sorted into permissionless and permission as well, right? So Naval talks about products are permissionless leverage. No one can stop you from writing a book. No one can stop you from shooting a YouTube video, starting a podcast, writing code, putting up a website. Like this is an incredible era of meritocracy where like, it's easy to forget that 20 years ago, no matter how badly you wanted a TV show, if you couldn't like get funding, shoot a show, get permission to distribute it on a network that was like regulated, and there was only so many slots and there was only so many channels, you couldn't have a TV show. And now anybody on earth can enter the meritocratic like arena of YouTube and climb. Mr. Beast might not be Mr. Beast 50 years ago because he would have had to like schmooze his way into a channel and spend time in his career and work his way up. But he could just grind for 10 years to like become this breakout success that he's become and now be the biggest YouTuber in the world. The same thing exists in open source software. You can just show up and start working on a project. The same thing exists in the web. You can just put up a website and start trying to drive traffic to it. There's a meme that really encapsulates permissionlessness well, which I really like, which is there's $10 million locked in your laptop. And if you type the right string of keys,
100%.
String of strokes in, like you will unlock $10 million. And I think that is just the best example of like life is a video game. You don't ask for permission. You're already playing. It's out there. You just need to like crack the code. And the more fun you're having doing that and deconstructing those challenges and figuring out your path forward, like the more it's going to feel like a video game, the more rewarding it's going to be, the more people's problems you're going to solve.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sometimes people ask me things like, "Oh, like how do you find a technical co-founder?" Like, I went to all these networking events, and I'm like, find someone who's done a project that has to do with something similar to what you want to do, drive
Mhm.
traffic to their project, show them that you can add value in advance, and then send them a message. They're like, "I never thought about that." I'm like, just invert, think the opposite. How would you get on this guy's radar, right?
Yeah,
Like, how
yeah.
would you?
Imagine you're auditioning and the audition already started. Imagine that person that you want to hire you is standing behind you, or your customer standing behind you, and they're like watching what you're doing, and you just need to go to work for them and then show the proof of work. Like it's another useful mental model.
For sure. And then you just have to be okay with the fact that you may get no response and you've put in this work. But what's the worst case scenario? You did the exercise and you probably learned from it. Like it's not like it's a negative. If anything, it's still a positive.
Hmm.
Cool. So you've said like you want to use leverage. You want to be doing two types of things. Things only you can do and things you love to do. So for you, what are the things that you would always want to own?
I think the thing that I am best at, if I have any talent at all, it is in like recognizing the genius of others. So I really prize high energy, high integrity, like very interesting relationships with people who are teaching me things, who are working on making the world a better place. And that takes a lot of different forms, right? That takes the form of somebody that I'm writing a book about. So like Naval, Balaji, Elon, that takes the form of like investors in my fund where we have a partnership and they trust me to sort of truffle pig around for interesting frontier opportunities for them and allocate capital for them and do that over a really long period of time. Those are wonderful relationships and I learn from my investors. And then on the founder side, like I learn a tremendous amount from people that are at the frontier of whatever they're doing and they have a vision for what 10 or 20 years in the future could look like and how their company, their technology can make it a better place. And I love that. That feels like living in a sci-fi book. I love supporting those people, whether we invest or not. Like I love rooting for them. I love seeing this new little potential device, like this new kernel of an idea that might, blossom into an absolute forest in, over the next 20 years. That's just a really fascinating way to live. So I love the relationships and I love learning. There's a lot of opportunities that I get to like outsource. People pitch all the time especially as I talk with big publishers, they're like, "Oh, we can get this book out. We just need like somebody else can write it for you. We'll just like put your name on it." And I'm like, no, no, no. There's nothing wrong with that. Like I run a company that helps people write books, but like for me, for these books that I'm choosing to write at this point in my life, I want to have the experience of processing the knowledge. Like I want it to siphon through my brain. That's how I choose who to work on. That's how I choose what ideas go in the book. And it's how I want to spend my time. So there's there's some of those things that like fell in both of those buckets of like I love to do it and it's a thing I'm uniquely good at, I think, which is like curating those ideas. um that's the best case scenario. That's where I really love it. That's trying to merge those in it for as many hours of the day as you can is like really holy grail.
For sure. And I think I think you start doing everything that you love to do, but over time, if it's not something that only you can do to the kind of quality and craftsmanship that you expect, then those are things that you can still use leverage for and just kind of understanding that.
Yeah, and I think we're making trade-offs around this constantly of like how many things can you do, how many things can you do well, where can you get support to unlock opportunities that you might not have otherwise been able to do. So yeah, I don't think there's any like black and white in there, but I find it just a useful North Star of like how much time are you spending doing the things that only you can do, and where can you strengthen yourself by offloading some of that work where you're not at your best to somebody who is, to somebody where it is the only thing they are uniquely good at it. They feel like they're in their zone of genius. And then it's a win-win. That's Pareto optimal sort of outcome. And those things are
Absolutely.
possible all over the place. I think people have a tendency to believe everybody's just like them. And if they don't want to do something, nobody else wants to do it either, which is like a very sort of self-defeating mindset when it comes to like synergy and delegation and finding, positions of higher leverage and working with people to bring the best out of them and the best out of you.
Absolutely. So you're just talking about Elon. I know you're writing a book about him. You said that your dream is that it will X the number of crack technical founders over the next 10 years. So you're picking the biggest innovator and you're deep enough in your career where you have a certain level of taste, experience, and craftsmanship around this. So this has the opportunity to be legacy defining. Do you view it that way?
Not really. Like I don't know. I don't think about it. I don't think about it in those terms at all. Like I kind of pick a project at a time, and I pick a big goal for that project, and that helps me, be excited about it, and that helps people understand like the mission and the motivation behind it. I've got a little better articulation than what you referenced now, which is like what I just finished. I just locked the manuscript. It should come out in Q1. But as I was writing the introduction, I really narrowed in on like 1 million Musks. My goal for this book is 1 million Musks in the next generation. And I think there's a lot of things that are hard about Elon Musk's life. And I don't think necessarily people would volunteer to replicate every part of it. Like he's got some hard things in his background. He had a hard upbringing, he's challenged relationships, but he is also undeniably, in my view, the greatest living founder, maybe one of the greatest entrepreneurs of all time. And he's not done yet, right? Like we got hopefully another, knock wood, like 40, 50 years. So
Yeah.
like, let's see, I don't see him slowing down. But the world and the future that I can imagine if there are a million Musks in the next generation, and I'll be specific about what I mean there, is just like people who are actively tackling things that are widely considered impossible and actually manifesting them in the real world, right? So like we were nowhere on the trajectory of going to Mars, and now it feels not inevitable, but like likely almost in the next 5 years based on the current SpaceX trajectory. Electric cars were nowhere, and climate change was worsening quickly, and there were no real plans for anything other than government imposed austerity programs and like ineffective climate credits, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Elon Musk just sort of willed us into this electric era and the autonomous era, both catalyzing massive changes that are going to save hundreds of thousands, or if not millions of lives, and save the planet from climate change in a very meaningful way. And just in case that doesn't work, also back up the biosphere by like getting us to Mars. And that's just two of his like 5 or 6 companies, right? Depending on how you count. So it's an unbelievable, unprecedented like kind of level of success. And I think the culture that he creates in the companies and how he elevates engineers and the efficiency that he drives and the intensity that they operate with is replicable. Like there's a lot of those core ideas that like if you're an 18-year-old trying to figure out what do you do with your life? What missions are important? How do I choose what to work on? How do I work on it? Like if you can download the best of Musk into your head and apply those things starting when you're 18 and do it, in a healthy, productive way, and we can get 1 million people, 1 million kids like dreaming that big, working that hard, embodying that culture, like the number of industries that could be radically changed, the number, like that is actually how we unlock this kind of next industrial revolution that leaves us all in a mind-boggling abundance that, we've lived in a little bit of stasis. Aside from the digital and software worlds, like there's not a lot of physical transformations that have happened in our lifetimes if you're under, 50, 60.
Yeah.
So, but these leaps in progress can continue. These are absolutely doable things. We are so far from the limits of our technology or our abilities or, what physics is going to let us do. So I see that as like the most inspiring part of Elon's message and existence, frankly, is like, what can he catalyze in terms of the next generation? And this is what I hope this book does. So I'm really, really excited. I've been working on it for like 5 years. It's millions and millions of words distilled, and I'm going to absolutely like go on a warpath to get this book into as many hands of like young people making decisions about their careers and what's important and how to work and what to work on as I possibly can.
Yeah, it's very obvious how much you care about it, because I know you said you like shared it with like 15 of your friends who all gave it like a 10 out of 10, and you're like, I'm still working on it. Like,
yeah, that was almost a year ago that I like did that exercise. The people that I think are whose opinions I deeply, deeply respect, and they were like, "This is incredible," and I'm like, "Great, I'm going to do another 25% turn on it."
And this may be a hard question to answer because there's probably like 100 answers you could give. But as you've done kind of deep research on Elon Musk, is there just one thing that maybe stands out that you didn't expect?
I think something I didn't appreciate until I got deep into it, that I think other people still may not, is just his risk tolerance. Like his risk tolerance, however high you think it is, it's higher. Like even if you kind of know the stories, it's really unbelievable the amount he was willing to risk and the number of times and the amount of time he spent like on the ragged edge of bankruptcy, as he says. And it's just the balls are unbelievable, frankly.
Yeah.
And I don't think you get these outcomes
Without it.
without it. I would love to believe that's possible. I mean, he is an outlier of an outlier, right? Like anybody else on earth, if you built any one of these companies, you'd be a hero and you'd be up in the pantheon of like of great engineers and great entrepreneurs. The fact that he did SpaceX and Tesla at the same time in parallel and funded them both personally with like tens of millions of dollars of his own money to the point where he had zero personal assets, like that is the equivalent of it running a 2-minute mile like twice at the same time in a row. It is almost unfathomable. Like if it was in fiction, you wouldn't believe it happened. And I think it like the crux of that happened so long ago that people kind of take it in stride now. But it's actually one of the most unbelievable, miraculous, like entrepreneurial feats, I think, in the last 100 years, if not ever. Yeah, certainly in our lifetimes.
Yeah, I feel like because he's still in his prime, kind of like from an athlete standpoint, we take it for granted.
Maybe like maybe it happened long ago. Maybe not enough people know the story. Maybe I don't know, but maybe it's because there hasn't been a movie made about it yet or something. Like it is just it's just not yet in the popular lexicon. Like how much risk he took. And I think, I wasn't there. I don't know, but like by all accounts, like how hard he worked. Like the accounts from his his partners at the time or his employees, years of sleeping in the factory, waking up screaming, like chewing on his hands, like it's really like he really pushed himself absolutely to the edge, which is a thing I think most people like don't even know. They're so far from that experience that it's difficult to empathize with how much more they have. And I think he's an incredible example of that too. David Goggins does this as an author and an athlete. And I think Elon does it as an entrepreneur. It's just a little more abstract. It's harder to, you hear somebody sleeping in the factory, pushing themselves, being on the edge of bankruptcy. And it's just difficult to empathize with like how heavy that feels, I think, especially when it's for like years at a time.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to get back to how you said you want to make like a million Elon Musks. It actually reminds me, Jeff Bezos was in an interview recently and he said, it's not about how much money I've made. Like I've made over, I think it was like $2.1 trillion of wealth for other people. And he's like, there should be a list of that. So it almost seems like that's kind of how you want to define it. Like how many high-level founders working on important problems can this book help facilitate?
Yeah, I think, I don't know exactly what the right like multiple is, but whatever the market cap value is of someone's company that they created, when you understand, and it's when in an industry and under a regime where like it is a good positive outcome, net positive, good execution of capitalism, no regulatory capture, no, cronyism, no whatever. The amount of total wealth created for society is actually multiples higher than the market cap of that company. If Jeff Bezos created a $2 trillion company, but every single customer who interacted with Amazon is better off as a result of it and gained some intangible value. Every employee who worked there is part of this system that created value for themselves, and they're better off for working on it. And there's the market cap value and all the investors that are better off as being a part of it. And there's all the future benefits to come. So it might be X. Like this is the miracle of entrepreneurs. And I still think that's not widely appreciated. Jensen Huang, I think, said he's created, I mean, the amount of billionaires created by NVIDIA at this point is like
crazy.
Triple digits, maybe?
Wow.
Like it's a lot. And I love when companies sort of espouse that deliberately, like even a humble business, like I think Quick Trips, I think it's Quick Trip. There's a case study about like, if you come work here and you're a manager of a individual location at Quick Trip and you're here for more than 30 years, you will retire a millionaire. Like
amazing.
That's an incredible thing for, a small town business that you can start as an entry level, minimum wage employee and work your way up and spend 30 years at a company and become a millionaire. Like that's an incredible opportunity. So it doesn't always have to be, the highest tech thing in the world, but yeah, I would love to see not just wealth created in those million Musks, but I would love to see like the frontiers of technology pushed forward in unfathomable ways today. Like that's the most exciting part to me. And the closer you get to these frontiers and the more times you see scientific discoveries, you hear about breakthroughs in the lab that happened 10 or 20 years ago. You hear about these like little glimpses of material science breakthroughs and you're just like, oh my God, we're so like, through God's eyes, we are dramatically under resourcing our frontiers. Our scientists, our engineers, our entrepreneurs, the people that are building new things that when they scale out, go out to the rest of the industry. Like venture capital is a tiny, tiny, tiny thing compared to private equity or real estate or,
Yeah.
commodities like some of these other currency markets. And it's just so important for the well-being of the next generation. Like the process of commercializing, distributing, and scaling up new technologies is like where wealth comes from. It's what lifts people out of poverty. It's what extends lifespans. I'm really hopeful that there's a lot of people that start to see that, and I use this line in the introduction too, to like that it is their moral obligation to drag the impossible into the possible. And that's what Elon does. He's done it over and over again. He's shown other people how to do it. He's shown us the process for doing it. He's shown what it takes. And you don't have to be a tortured, like crazy person with a rage demon in your head to do it. Like you can do it in a calm and effective way. And I know founders who are doing it, but I do hope, we can dream a little bigger and build a little bigger.
And at some point, your book will just go directly to the person with Neuralink, and then it's going to move even faster.
As long as it's not jumbled up with every other book that, I need a,
I feel like it's like, in the Matrix, when you like pick a specific thing, it's just we're putting the lessons that you need to learn into your brain from this right now.
Yeah, it comes pre-installed in your Neuralink update. Yeah.
Awesome. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to put an image on the screen, and I want you to just tell me what the first thing that comes to mind is.
Well, this took a turn for the psychological evaluation test.
It sure did.
This is a new thing for a podcast. My first reaction is you have been scrolling through my Instagram way, 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 way back. Yeah, this book, Poor Charlie's Almanac, I picked up off my dad's bookshelf when I was, I don't know, 21 years old maybe. And it was a huge inflection point for me. I just felt there's a handful of people that I feel like you can admire almost every aspect of them. And Munger is one. And so I absolutely devoured everything I could find on Munger. I felt like he was extremely wise, moral, ethical, accomplished, resilient, curious, fascinating, funny. And so I read everything I could get my hands on, and then I read everything that he recommended. And that became sort of spent a lot of my 20s, like reading him and his influences. And that became the fabric of a lot of the friendships I've made, going to the Daily Journal, going to Omaha and meeting other young people who had like been similarly drawn to Munger. I was texting with some of them this morning, and they're like, we're far flung, we're all across the country, but like these ideas that kind of brought us together, and this ethos has been like the kind of a fabric in my life all along. And it's an incredible signal, that's I'm very grateful that was on my dad's shelf. And I did get to I met Peter Kaufman, who assembled this book, which is
amazing.
How I got a signed copy, which is one of my most prized possessions. The quote, the best thing a human being can do is to help another human being to know more. That's why I write books. That's why I create products. It's sort of a guiding light for me. And Peter, the format of the book itself was influential, obviously. Like, the Almanac of Naval is a direct homage to Poor Charlie's Almanac, which is a direct homage to Poor Richard's Almanac, which was sort of book that Ben Franklin wrote under a pseudonym. So I think Naval belongs in that lineage. And I think, what Peter Kaufman did to show that, you can just build a book out of the wisdom of somebody you admire, and it does good for the world, and changed the trajectory of my life. And I've been lucky to meet Peter Kaufman too. And I think he's an incredibly brilliant guy, underrated, understudied, fantastic CEO.
Awesome. So something I saw, and it just got me thinking, is like, you say you're a collector of useful ideas. Munger has said he's a collector of inanities, which is another way to say he collects instances of people behaving stupidly.
Yeah.
Did you invert, and your answer ended up being collecting useful ideas?
Perhaps unintentionally. I think Peter Kaufman also does this, and he and Munger have, I think, had many conversations about like, it's one thing to avoid mistakes, and that removes a lot of negative space, but just because you avoid a mistake doesn't mean you are necessarily doing the optimal thing. And so Peter spent a lot of time collecting good examples, optimal moves, good ideas. And so I think they're both good practices, right? Like I think in some, tennis is a funny like metaphor for this. Like most amateur games are won or lost based on how many points you lose, right? Like so if you're an amateur tennis player, like just try to keep the ball in and you'll win. If you're a pro player, like that's probably not enough because everybody can pretty much keep the ball in, and so you have to like go for a very direct, like you have to go for a kill shot, you have to go for putting the other player out of position, you have to win the point through advantage, not just wait for the other person to make a mistake because they're not likely to. And so I think those are different frameworks, right? Like in some areas of life, it's sufficient to just like understand the failure modes and avoid them. In others, you really want to emulate, you want to just not avoid the bottom 80%, but really try to work your way to the top 1% or top 10th or 100th of a percent. And for those, it's probably advantageous to to not just eliminate the failure modes, but study the success cases and see where those might have something to teach you. And I'm sure Charlie did a lot of both, right? I think
of course, obviously, yeah.
Collecting inanities is probably like a prescription for the masses thing, which if you look at, it's almost a modern religion. Like if you look at the religious texts, they don't always tell you what to do. They don't tell you how to be better. They don't tell you how to accrue power. They just help you avoid all the common mistakes of sin and folly. And if you avoid the multiplying by zero, as he says, like you'll probably have a pretty good life and the rest will mostly take care of itself. And so I think that's a great place to start and a perfectly reasonable thing and the right prescription for most people.
For sure. You were talking about tennis. Do you know the story about Charlie Munger and when he practiced tennis?
No, tell me.
I'm pretty sure this is true, but from what I remember, he spent like an entire summer just practicing volleying at the net because he thought it was like the highest ROI.
That's hilarious.
Yeah,
that's very Munger. Find the leverage.
Very Munger, right? Find the one thing that's like the high leverage item. He's like, most points are at the net. I'm just going to be good at that.
Yeah, it's like I used to play pickup basketball with a guy. Almost everybody was like in their 20s and really fit, and we played with a guy who was like 60 and didn't run the full court, but he was an absolute murderer from three, and so everybody wanted him on their team because somebody would always leave him, and he could always shoot, and his hit rate was really high. It was awesome.
Well, if you watch basketball, most of the players who are in the league who are over like 37, they're just like spot up 3-point shooters because you can still do that skill while you're older, right?
Yeah.
So
it started to become a liability on defense, but yeah.
But definitely a liability on defense. So what is your Mount Rushmore, your 4 favorite lessons that you've learned from Charlie Munger?
This is a long list to triage. I really appreciate the quote's in front of me, so I'm going to start with it. But like the best thing you can do is help another human being to know more, and attached with that's instructive, but it's attached with this idea like the acquisition of wisdom is a moral duty. I really like that one. I sort of admonish people with that all the time, and including myself. In the business and brand world, I think take a simple idea and take it seriously, combined with this idea that a winning formula usually maximizes or minimizes one or two variables. The example Charlie uses is IKEA. Like if you would have pitched IKEA as like, all right, you have to go to this warehouse, you're going to walk around this living room, then you got to go to a warehouse, then you got to take home these boxes, then you got to build it all yourself. That was an insane thing. It's going to be really cheap furniture that you're not going to want to move, and but it's going to be really well designed, but it's going to be really cheap, and everybody's going to know it. Like that brand pitch seems insane, but the practicality of it having really extreme variables makes it really clear and really appealing, and makes it a carved out space in the market, and makes it a really great business. Another that I really like, if you want a good spouse, the best path is to deserve it. That's something I told myself a lot. A lot of these are sort of related, the supporting arguments, but if you want something in life, figure out the price and pay it. Those are both really key. And a more specific version of this that I use with friends that are like, I'm married, but friends that are single and looking is like, if you want a wife who's in the gym at 6 a.m., like
Go to the gym.
Go to the gym at 6 a.m. You'll probably meet her there. Like the another Mungerism. I mean, the whole category of just like seeing the world through first the lens of like the objective physical world of like what is likely to happen, and then the whole separate lens of the psychological motivations, I think is really, really, really useful. I mean, the whole talk of psychology of human misjudgment is kind of like that. Like, in what ways are humans predictably irrational? In what ways do their behaviors, counteract their statements? Seeing those is like really helpful in understanding them for yourself and your own operating system, but also, as you're working with other people and coordinating with them, that's really useful and important. I mean, the whole category of a Lollapalooza, right? Like these
Yeah.
multiplying outlier, like self-reinforcing outlier effects. This sort of hints at the power law, right? Like you have these extreme outcomes, and some things return to average, and some things just continue to compound. If it's a winning formula, it just keeps getting bigger and more, accruing more and more power in the market, or in the zeitgeist, whatever it is. So I think Lollapalooza is a really helpful one too. And I just appreciate his humor, honestly. Like, I think
Oh, I love his humor.
he's just fucking funny.
Yeah, he's a funny guy. And for me, it's really interesting because I've been listening and reading Munger for, I don't know, 15, 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And things really click at different times in your life. So maybe like 2-3 years ago, just this whole idea of like incentive driving behavior clicked. And now any kind of decision, anyone that I speak with, I can see through that lens. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't before, even though I'd read the material. So I find sometimes it just needs to be delivered to you in the right way in the right time. And then it's there forever. Like that can't be taken away from me now.
Yeah, I spent a day with Naval and recorded an update to our audiobook and published that as a podcast. It was a highlight of my life.
Awesome.
So
it was
far.
Awesome.
I really enjoyed making it. And I thought it was a great conversation. I still listen to it, because I learned from it. And I'm still, one of the ideas that he talked about is like this alternating cycle of like, you need to hear the wisdom, but you also need the lived experience to validate the wisdom. Like it's very difficult to like truly embody and enact something until you've seen it play out in your whole life, maybe a positive and a negative example in some cases. As you're talking about, like when you actually drive incentives and see it work, you're kind of like, oh yeah, Charlie was right. But that wisdom was floating around waiting for the experience to attach it to. And the like feedback loop between those things. Like you always want to be gaining experience and you always want to be ingesting, this new potential wisdom. And when those sort of atoms collide, a new thing like locks in, hopefully in a more permanent way for you.
Yeah, something you guys were talking about actually was this concept of like timeless versus timely info. And when I heard it, it made me think of like Nick Sleep. I don't know if you know what that is, but he has this concept of like the shelf life of information. He describes it as kind of like food. Some is perishable while some has a long shelf life. So how do you kind of allocate your time between studying what's timeless versus what's timely?
Yeah, I don't think Naval said this exactly, but like advocates a barbell approach, right? Like the greatest philosophers in history are generally best at describing the unchanging aspects of the human condition, like the writing that has survived for hundreds of years. Whoever your favorite philosophers are, but like there's a reason why we're still reading, Plato. And it's because a lot of stuff is really well articulated, or Shakespeare. In terms of what's like recent, this is kind of like the news. Zero people on earth are reading the news from 6 months ago or 5 years ago, picking up a newspaper and like reading it through as though it's relevant today. Though the news of today may be relevant, if you're in an industry like, venture and investing where like timely information is very valuable and you want to know when there's a new breakthrough, a new discovery, a new unlock, a new market emerging, something like that, then like that timeliness of that information is very relevant. There's also a lot of timely information is irrelevant, at least to me, right? Of like, who is doing what are the sports scores, who's what celebrities are doing what, like that's not relevant to my work or interests, but it is timely. And maybe there's even some timelessness to it, depending. But I think there's a lot of people that have a lot of experience or consume a lot of information, but never seem to get any wiser. And it's because they don't have a practice of infusing this timelessness and noticing the patterns and like hanging what's happening on wisdom, or frameworks that come along with it. So time wise, I don't know. It depends. Like I spend a lot of time on Twitter, honestly. And some of those are really fresh breakthrough things where I'm following founders and investors who are right at the cutting edge. And sometimes I'm following, I mean, honestly, the value investors are really good at the long-term timeless. I'm following historians. I'm following people that are like curating what is essentially timeless stuff. I'm reading, last night I was reading Chesterfield's letters. Chesterton? Yeah, Chesterton. It's like, was in the book, not looking at the cover. And like a lot of those things are so still so useful to whatever you're dealing with. Like the timeless almost always applies to the timely, but the timely doesn't necessarily always exist, but it can be decisive for some of these industries and some of these decisions you're making.
Yeah, I think the timeless is always useful and it's important, but you have to get in the arena too, so you can make that wisdom your own.
Yeah. I think there's, it's very attractive to think about just like sitting in a cabin reading and acquiring wisdom. But like, if you never even write, let alone sort of try to act, like I refer to this as like the test of reality. I want to learn, I want to acquire new knowledge. I get a lot of excitement from it. But if you don't test the things that you're learning, it's hard to stand on that knowledge. You can be reading a lot of stuff about what's timely. You can be reading a lot of stuff about what's timeless. You can feel really smart. And I think we all know people that do this. They are really smart, or they present really smart, or they put a lot of emphasis in making themselves really smart, but they never actually take very many tests. They kind of work a dead end job, or at least like don't put much of themselves into their job. They don't create great, unique, new pieces. Like I'm not saying work is the end all be all, or family or anything, but like, you can't just walk around being like, I read more books than someone, but do nothing with that and feel morally superior to them. In my view, somebody that's like in the arena, even if they've never cracked a book in their life, but they're earning knowledge through like bouncing off walls and interacting with the real world and manifesting things and building stuff. Like that's very admirable.
Do you think that building judgment is underrated?
Yeah.
I think even when people think that they are appropriately rating judgment, they're actually still underrating judgment.
Yes, I agree. I agree with that on a lot of levels. It's a broad word, so it's easy to overascribe it. But like, thinking about who I want to work with, who I want to invest in, who I trust to like take care of people in my family. Judgment is just so important. And the better somebody's judgment is, the more reliable they are, the more trustworthy they are, the more capable they are, the more things they're like doable, like by them over some time scale. It's just very, it's very underrated and under discussed. I think, people talk about improving themselves in all these ways, but maybe because it's abstract, it's very difficult. You rarely hear people say like, oh, I'm really working on improving my judgment, or like my judgment's gotten a lot better over the last couple of years, right? Like it's really almost entirely, I hear that from investors, because they have skin in the game and they have a feedback loop and they're really deliberately trying to improve their decision-making abilities. But I think, so many people could benefit from deliberate practice of their judgment.
Yeah, I think part of the reason why judgment can go underrated, if we talk in, let's say, retail investors, for example, it's that they now feel, because there's no friction, that they can make 1,000 decisions this year. But if you go back to the Buffett lens where he says make 20 decisions in your life, then judgment becomes a lot more important. But when you kind of focus on quantity of decisions, then each piece of judgment seems less important. So it can be underrated in that lens.
I think it's about the quality of the feedback loop, right? Like when you said, 1,000 decisions a year, like some of the most capable people I know and best entrepreneurs, one weird pattern is that they were like professional poker players for some amount of time in their life. Like my buddy Kevin Espiritu built Epic Gardening, right? Incredible business, incredible guy, very fun follow, highly recommend. And he paid his way through college playing professional poker. And those guys make thousands of decisions a night, but they have a really tight feedback loop between evaluating those decisions, and that's how they get better. And so I think you can make 1,000 decisions, and even if they're good ones, if you don't learn anything from them, even if you make money, but you don't evaluate the quality of those decisions and determine like what made it good, what made it bad, what can I learn, how do I iterate, how do I make it better next time, like you're not actually improving judgment there.
It's actually really interesting because even if you are investing, on the surface, it looks like you're just making one judgment, but you're actually making a ton of micro judgments in the moment to really discuss like, is this a red flag or a blocker that I shouldn't continue digging into this opportunity? So you're making all these like little micro judgments, but to the surface, it's just, did I invest? Yes or no?
Yeah. This is, and then once you've invested, like, do I sell? Yes or no? So, I talk about this when I talk with authors about writing their books. It's like writing a book is not one decision to start. It's 1,000 decisions to not quit. If you can, even if you don't make progress today, if you don't quit and you try again tomorrow, then like you are still making progress. You are still in the game. And so I think it's underrated, this like the long-term mindset there, and understanding like even if you only bet $1 on something, but you ran through a good process and you were thoughtful about what you did and you evaluated the outcome honestly, then your judgment leveled up. +1 to judgment. Good for you. Like whether you won or lost money on that, either way, you're making progress on honing your judgment.
Nice.
I do that in relationships too. Like every time you date somebody, like do a postmortem of the relationship. What did I learn? What did I like? What didn't work? Did I bring my best self? What would I change, next time? How do I approach this? What qualities did I find that I admired? What qualities broke this thing up in myself and them?
And then send it to her for feedback.
I do not endorse this method. Burn it. Do it and burn it.
So on the timely, I was actually thinking like there's things like 11 Labs and things that can do audio cloning. I would listen to all your old blogs and content if you audio cloned it, because I'm someone who prefers to take in content via audio while I'm doing things as opposed to sitting and reading. That's always been kind of the case. I used to listen to like CDs of books in my car in like the 90s and 2000s. So I was like, okay, I can read all his blogs, but if it was in his voice, because there's some YouTube channels that have like Paul Graham's voice, and it's pretty good. And I was like, yeah, I would listen to this for a lot of like people who write, and that content's kind of like buried in the archives. So I feel like that's it's not a huge trend, but it's a timely thing that like content creators can use now that I think would provide value to their audience.
It's interesting. What Naval does this, but it's not my favorite, is to do like these like short 5-minute podcast episodes. Because like when I put in a podcast, I go do the dishes for 20 minutes or go for a walk or I'm on a long drive, and I don't want to be like resetting a podcast every 5 minutes.
I agree.
But maybe I bet I could categorize blog posts and just be like, all right, here's 3 or 4 essays on wealth or on leverage, and I'm going to like read this one, recap it, bridge to the next one, read this, recap it, and make them a little bit longer. Like those would be fun to revisit, actually.
Yeah, you could even use like GPT to organize it for you if you wanted to, as a lower effort way. But I don't think you want to do that.
No, I
need to review it.
I want to review the ideas. I want to make my brain do some heavy lifting.
All right. I'm going to finish today off with a bunch of kind of quick questions here. So the first one is, what is something you deeply believe that most of your smart friends do not?
That climate change is solved. It's just a matter of like engineering that we're gonna have like a dramatically electrified, that energy is the fundamental like driver of everything, and we need massively more energy, primarily through solar, but also nuclear. That we should 10x the amount of like people on the planet and the amount of energy per capita. That having kids is the meaning of life.
Wow.
I don't know. There's probably quite a long list. That everybody who considers themselves part of a political party is wrong and no longer thinking critically about anything. Cool. Probably shouldn't end on that one, but
no, that's fine. We can cut that out too. All right. Next one here is there a piece of wisdom that you've learned and you like logically you understand it from Naval that you've actually had challenges implementing?
I mean, the first one that comes to mind is just like, obviously it's very difficult to live a truly enlightened, like totally unbothered life. I intellectually understand that, the self is an illusion and none of this matters, and there's really no reason to ever be angry, because it's literally never useful, and all it does is make your subjective experience worse. In practicality, it's very difficult to like actually eliminate that from your life
Yeah.
completely. That the concept of stress is like generally useless and unhelpful. So it's mostly behavioral stuff like that. I think it's also really hard to separate, to always be doing the highest and best use of your time, regardless of like expectations and social commitments. Really, really, really hard. And you want to be a good person. You want to be reliable. You want to deliver for the people around you. You don't want to shirk responsibilities. You don't want to be perceived to be better than, or be perceived to be perceiving yourself as better than anybody or anything, like, any particular job. But that many times is at odds with like waking up and doing the thing that you think has the highest value to the world, to the future, to yourself, to your family. And so that's a tricky thing.
Yeah, I think what's also interesting is if you are not just 100% about your work, it's harder to know what the 2 or 3 most important things to do on the day is, because there's very clear high leverage items you can do for work. But if you take that approach with parenting, that quality is more important than quantity, I think you are assuming you know when those moments are going to come. And sometimes it is the quantity that matters as a parent. So I think a lot of people are really work focused will say things like, oh, I spend quality time with my kids. But with kids, I think it's quantity, and you're just spreading like a surface area and you don't know when the quality is. It's not always on the big family vacation.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And I think quantity is a merit of measure, like, or a measure of merit on its own in parenting. Like whether it's good time or whether you're just doing something boring or dumb together, like those are all good things. Actually, this is another thing that I think is probably an unpopular opinion. Is I actually, if the means allow, like I would rather functionally retire while my kids are young, somewhere between 0 and 10, when they like most want to be with their parents and get the most out of being with their parents, or work dramatically less and make that time up in retirement. There's plenty of people
I
that
did
like
that. I
retire
did
at
that
60 and like, yeah,
for the last 4 years. I dedicated to my kids when they were ages like 3 to 7 to 8,
I
because I
love
thought
that.
it was the high value time when they needed their dad to spend time with them, to play video games, to teach them lessons, and just be there. I kind of thought like, hey, that's more important than high school or after.
Yeah.
So I want to dedicate it now while they're still in learning mode.
Yeah. I think that should be something much more culturally normal. I'd rather, I know plenty of people that are retired when they're 60 and then kind of like,
Cool. What do you do now? Golf?
yeah, a lot of golf, a lot of like that time is just a little less precious. Like, and whatever, I'm never going to actually retire. So like, I'll probably just keep doing stuff I love forever. So like, what's the point? The opportunity cost of this time with family when their kids are young is so high.
Well, also think about those hours are a larger proportion of the total hours that they've lived. So it's
Mm-hmm.
more meaningful. Like that's kind of the lens that
Yeah.
I look at it, is like, if I spend 20 hours a week with them when they're 3, that's the equivalent of 60 hours a week when they're 9. So it is actually quite valuable.
That's really interesting, especially, yeah, if you consider your presence as like sort of infusing the starting conditions of like, the personality, to the extent that nurture does that. Like, I think that's a really like good and useful thing. Yeah.
But what I'm going to do is I'm going to
Good for
put a
you.
few images on the screen here for each one.
God.
Tell me what it is and your first thought. And I dig deep, so you already know that at this
No,
point.
now I'm nervous. I thought it was just going to be the one.
All right, let's go with this one here first.
Are we uploading my consciousness to AI?
No, what do you see here?
Oh, Naval's life formulas. This is old blog.
I didn't
Naval
know
and
about Startup Boy until I knew about Venture Hacks, obviously, but I had no idea the Startup Boy existed.
yeah, old school Naval, early days, the pre history. Naval and Nivi are both like incredible writers and just incisive thinkers, and their blogs still, I mean, so much of this still is evergreen, honestly. Yeah, you can't spend too much time installing this stuff in your head. I really like the 4 types of scale. Life Formulas was in, I think Tim Ferriss republished it in Tools of Titans. I think, it's in the back of the Naval book too. But like the fact that he formulated these super, super early and just distills, a good life down. The 4 types of scale and a handful of kind of similar posts like this that Nivi did are really formative to me of like what actually is a startup, right? So, I don't know that I'm going to nail this, but off the top of my head, like he's like, there's businesses like McDonald's that make a mediocre experience and drive massive scale. There's businesses like Four Seasons that drive an incredible experience, but it's very small scale and it's very expensive. But technology startups, which is back to why I just absolutely ranted about like the value of Elon and the ethos of Silicon Valley and the moral importance of scaling technology, is over and over again finding ways to deliver massively better experiences in the way that the Four Seasons does, but at the scale of McDonald's. And if you think about what the iPhone actually did, it's that. It created a device that no one on earth could have possibly conceived of or afforded before it was created, that is magical, and then made it so many times that billions and billions of people can access it. And like that is of such moral good that if you're not working on that, please work on understanding it so that you can start working on it.
I agree. At least work on understanding it. All right, next one. This is the OG.
Oh man, you've been in the Wayback Machine.
I have been in the Wayback Machine.
This is my first landing page for. This is probably my first like moderately successful internet project called Evergreen. I worked on I would pick a topic. I'd go out to my email list and say, like, what's the best thing you've ever read, seen, watched, heard, listened to? What's the best resource on, say, network effects? And then I would smash all that in my head over the course of the next week. And then I'd write a summary. There's sort of a fractal, like, here's the best parts of this idea. Here's a summary of it and link out to the original material. It was kind of my like self-assessed MBA. I learned a lot doing it. I met a lot of really interesting people. This was relatively early in the kind of like, Lenny Rakitsky hadn't even started yet, but like Stratechery was still relatively niche and Farnham Street was getting started. And there's definitely days where I'm like, you fucking idiot, you should have just kept doing this, because it would have compounded into a really incredible thing by now, I think. But I try to make a leap to like making this a platform like Hacker News. And I just didn't like make that leap. And then I started working on the books instead. So also fun fact, this logo is just me typing in Helvetica with a highlighted background and screenshotting it. So just keeping my design budget down.
You know what's funny is if you hired like a really fancy designer, they might make the exact same one, but
they would have just like
wow,
erased a few corners of Helvetica, like of the G, to make it look like a tree or something. Yeah, no, this is a really cool experience. It was my first sort of tangible proof that like if you just do good work and put it out on the internet, like you will slowly accrue like attention and friendships. And this became an early sort of, I don't know, calling card, but like this became early proof of work that led to some really great friendships that were super pivotal in my life.
Awesome. I love the name too. As someone whose podcast is Earn Secrets, I see Evergreen. I'm like, what a good name.
I really like the name. Yeah. The whole point was to collect this evergreen knowledge that was like, this has been a theme in my career actually, is like, there's one of the original things from this blog post, or from Evergreen, was like this blog post that Mark Andreessen wrote in like 2008 or something about product market fit was still the best thing ever written about product market fit, but like it was nowhere in the algorithms and you just had to know, or somebody had to tell you about it. And so I wanted to build something that, like, rather than Hacker News, which sliced by like almost every feed basically slices by what's recent, I want to slice horizontally by what is best. I want to, like, what is the the top ranked thing on this topic of all time, and then you could go down and read those things. So that was kind of the ethos, and like that was the mission of Evergreen, and that mission is still functionally what I do in the books, right? Like I'm taking wisdom that I think is timeless and critical and useful and everybody could benefit from knowing, that has vanished in the algorithms, and just preserving it in a more permanent format, which is books. Is a low entropy format for extremely durable, timeless wisdom.
Amazing. So the last one here, I actually really believe that what makes us authentic and unique is kind of the hobbies and the childhood that we had growing up and how we're able to relate it to the things we're working on today. So I've heard you do that with things like sci-fi, but also with Harry Potter quite a bit. You've related Harry Potter to things in technology. So I'm putting three examples here. Maybe you can just talk through it because I find analogies that culturally hit your childhood, they really connect and stick with us. So here's a few.
I do not remember the Naval to the fat lady portrait at all.
I think it was just a Hogwarts portrait in generally.
Okay.
Not to the fat lady. I just picked a Hogwarts portrait. No, no, no.
That's fair. That's fair. No, the portraits. Sorry, this is yeah. I'm getting deep into the portraits in Dumbledore's office of the previous headmasters is like my analogy for Naval because they're like that's my analogy for the model that I've constructed in my head by spending hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours like studying and listening to Naval is I feel like I have a thin, rough model of him in my head that you can have a discussion with in the way that like Dumbledore would reference the discuss sort of with those portraits what those portraits knew when they were painted because that's like the magical constraint around those portraits. They're not infinite LLMs, they're not updated, they know only what they knew when they were painted, but you can still interact with them. So I think that's part of the like but I think with LLMs and you can imagine one of the things I love about Harry Potter is that like magic removes your constraints and then you can come up with something that's like a really cool fascinating concept and then you can actually work backwards from like okay but if you were to build that with technology how would you build it, is that buildable, and like you could absolutely build, especially with LLMs now, you could build a portrait, a live interactable like a portrait that you could have a conversation with. And I know Bob Mesta is somebody that I've learned a lot from, and he helped Clayton Christensen come up with the like jobs to be done framework and has written a bunch of books with Scribe actually. And in his office, he's got like his 6 kind of heroes, his like personal board of advisors that are like he painted those portraits up in his office. And I always thought it'd be really cool to like if those become screens with LLMs that are like deeply trained, you can like have this literal conversation with on demand with this potential board of interested parties that knows everything about you and everything that they know. And this is how I use LLMs all the time already. It's just like, hey, tell me what Andy Grove would do in this situation. Density is a company started by a friend of mine that was one of my very first angel investments, and they're using computer vision. It's not quite Marauder's Map because they're not labeling people because it's meant to be sort of privacy sensitive, but it does map a space and shows you exactly how people are using it in real time. And sort of quantifying the unquantifiable, which is like how people use space and how densely it's used, and how it might be optimized. I think that's a really cool one. And Instagram, I rail on Instagram all the time because I think no matter how evil or how genius you were, you could not come up with a more destructive tool for human happiness. And it is the mirror of Erised, which is desire backwards from Harry Potter, which is basically when you stare into it, it shows you you obtaining your heart's greatest desire. And Dumbledore's sort of caution against the mirror is that people waste away in front of it, never knowing, what's real or what's fake, losing sight of themselves. And they would rather like starve to death watching themselves obtain the thing, watching a fake image of themselves obtaining their heart's greatest desire rather than like go live and actually strive for achieving it itself. And I think that is Instagram. And I think that a lot of people have that relationship with Instagram. And I think you should be as cautious with your like relationship with Instagram as you are with your relationship to like drugs, alcohol, like other highly addictive and life destroying substances. Yeah, Harry Potter was just perfectly timed in my childhood. And I was like deep in it and reread it all the time. And I still find it to be a like really useful and fascinating set of kind of shared metaphors. I love shared myth like that, where we all get this like kind of new software installed in our heads and we can use it as shorthand to like discuss things. And I also think it's just a great story. Not that many great stories come around that often at that scale that speak to that many people. There's something really like culturally special about it that I feel like, there's a Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter. I don't think Game of Thrones quite belongs on that.
I have Game of Thrones, Jon Snow's sword in my office here,
Nice.
and pretty disappointed with the last season, but I still have a lot of love for it. Like, it made me feel a certain way. I was super into it. I would like watch recap shows on YouTube and the whole deal.
Yeah. My current hunch is because Game of Thrones was so adult, it just didn't reach the same level of like long-term cultural zeitgeist that
That's fair.
Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, and Star Wars did, because you just have a different relationship with stuff like that when you're like 10 than when you're 25.
Sure. Awesome. Eric, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. Where can everyone find you?
I'm on Twitter all the time, and links to all my projects are at ejorgenson.com. If you want to help write a book, scribemedia.com. If you want to invest in a fund, rollingfund.com. I don't know. There's a long list of ways we can hang out.
Thank you.
Thank you.